Hello, I'm Tony.
And I'm Patrick.
And we want to welcome you to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion on Mitch Stokes' book, How to Be an Atheist.
That's right.
And we're worked our way now after our introduction last time to Chapter 1. And in this chapter, what Stokes does here is he tries to give us an idea of what a good skeptic looks like, right? And of course, from the history of philosophy perspective, probably the best skeptic that he can choose is David Hume.
Yeah.
Right? And Hume was a skeptic. He lived in the 1700s. And so he's going to be Stokes' example of what a good skeptic looks like.
And we see it too, people in the pro-atheist community, knocking on Humean's door, and
it's actually opening it, right?
And saying, "This is my guy. This is my guy." So we want to take them at their word and check out to see what they claim to believe. Yeah, see if they actually believe it.
Yeah. So how do we be a good atheist? Well, we need to be skeptical. And what's our prime example of skepticism is David Hume, right?
Yeah.
He calls him the great David Hume. Provides us with the best example of this science-induced skepticism. Right? His writings were generally sophisticated, iconoclastic, and Promethean, and he's been a champion of skeptical unbelievers ever since, as you've just alluded to. All right. So most specifically, he says we'll see that folks do follow Hume, as you suggested, our atheist friends, but they don't usually follow Hume in the skepticism about causality, induction, the material world, personal identity, and morality. And yet Hume allowed us to question all of these types of things.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so then he talks about Alexander Rosenberg. He wrote The Atheist Guide to Reality, who attempts to follow Hume. He believes that Rosenberg, for the most part, is a sincere attempt to be this kind of skeptic that Hume, lays out for us.
He tries, yeah.
Yeah. So he eventually found his way. Rosenberg, Stokes tells us, this is what he says: it took a few years, but by reading David Hume, that is Rosenberg, was able to figure out the mistake preventing science from satisfying me. The mistake, as Hume showed so powerfully, was to think there is any more to reality than the laws of nature that science discovers. But once Hume showed Rosenberg that science tells us all there is, the pieces of his atheistic worldview fell into place. So that's what Rosenberg claims, right? Hume showed him that all reality is just what nature tells us. In other words, only the natural world is what takes up reality.
Yeah, so naturalists, so they believe that anything physical is what's real, and anything that's not, see, taste, touch, sense perceived is not real.
Right. So only our sense perceptions, what we can perceive, is in the nature is what's real.
Yeah.
Right?
So the mind, morality, numbers, different things that we kind of take for granted as existing or hope to exist or reason up to, or maybe not reason's the right word, but just being a product of the universe that we live in. Most things that we think exist or we take it for granted as existing don't exist. So things like stars, bacteria, other people, but we can't say that the mind or other people's minds exist. They are fluctuations of chemicals that produce a personality. Right. And you can, maybe only be sure of your own.
Yeah. Or not. Right?
Or not.
Yeah.
As we'll get to.
Because only the natural world exists, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so he says most atheists think that Rosenberg gets things right when he says that science tells us there is no God. But he says, as he alluded to, few follow Rosenberg to the conclusion that atheism leads to anything goes morality. So the problem is Rosenberg questions morality, right? Because it's not a physical thing, right? Here's a quote he gives us. Is there a God? This is from Rosenberg, right? Is there a God? No. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the nature of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Is there free will? Not a chance. What is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no moral difference between them. Why should I be moral? Because it makes you feel better than being immoral. Is abortion, euthanasia, suicide, paying taxes, foreign aid, or anything else you don't like forbidden, permissible, or something obligatory? Anything goes, right? So he believes that most atheists follow Rosenberg with regard to the physical, empirical world, but they don't want the anything goes morality.
Right. Well, and we've seen people like Dawkins try and make this claim too, but then in the same breath talk about loving his wife, and then trusting that she's faithful to him, and you can't really get that. And there's no basis for not going out and robbing the bank, punching your neighbor, taking his children as slaves. Not all that is permissible in Rosenberg's exercise of his
right, because if the physical universe is all there is, then an action is just an action is just an action.
Right.
One action is, there isn't no right or wrong, good or bad, because that's only what I feel or what I think.
Right.
But if a rock rolls down the hill, that's an action. If somebody, if I punch somebody, that's just an action.
Yeah.
It's what I feel is what Rosenberg says about it that kind of makes me think there's a moral stance.
Not to say that there aren't repercussions, that other entities exist and could throw you in jail, but the fact that you can say, no, this is wrong or this is immoral, even here to say there is no moral difference between them, or because it makes you feel better than being immoral. Even those kind of sneak in a little bit of, well, what do you mean by immoral if those words don't really exist?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if you're classifying two things, by what basis are you making a judgment call to say, well, this one seems more immoral than this one.
Right.
Well, this one seems like it would keep me out of jail, which then I could do more bad things. But then, But
again, we have to question what do we mean by bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything that keeps me in jail is bad.
Yeah. So, and we also though have to be careful about the consequences of the boulder rolling down the hill because it could squish me.
Sure. But we wouldn't point to the boulder and say that's evil.
Evil boulder.
Evil. Yeah. Yeah. We would say, oh, that's tragic.
It's
but
just an action that happens in the physical world.
Right. So starvation, children dying. Nuclear holocaust.
Just actions that happen.
Those are things.
Physical.
Those
world.
are things.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
So notice Rosenberg. I mean, our friend Stokes there, Mitch Stokes, makes the point. Almost all of the atheists then believe that atheism is entirely consistent with objective moral laws, and he says, I think things are just the opposite. I do not think science shows there is no God, nor do I think that atheism is consistent with an objective ethical standard. Now, he's going to deal with ethics later in the second part of his book, but he's laying his cards out on the table, as it were, before here, right? All right, so then he moves to what he calls the experimental, and this is in quotes, right? The experimental method. Like most intellectuals of his time, Hume was wildly impressed with Newton's, that is, Isaac Newton's new philosophy. Right? Today we call that not, natural philosophy, which is what it was called then.
Right.
Today we call it science, right? So we
Yeah.
use a kind of a Latin derivative of the idea of natural philosophy.
Right. Predictive theory, experimentation, conclusions based on those experimentations leads you to refine your theory. So,
Good. Or what he suggests here is that there were two main aspects of this new philosophy, both of which attested to the uncanny cognitive powers of our minds. One was the use of mathematics in the formulation of natural laws, right? Amazing that we were able to attach, all these mathematical intricacies to what was going on in the physical universe. I mean, just amazing. It was it blew people away.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and in college level physics, you learn Newtonian mechanics, and then you take your calculus classes, and you see mathematics matching up to what you learn in physics.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you learn that Newtonian mechanics, the three laws, is out the window because Einstein came around, and they teach you, oh well, they're good enough. They get you to pretty much the right
They got
things.
us to the moon, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Einstein was the one that carried us over. So even there, we see, okay, we're supposed to trust in science, but science has moved us along. So what we called science before was wrong, but it's good enough. But now we have a new science.
Yeah.
So how can we trust a science that continuously moves forward? The process is still there, but our beliefs, when we say, oh, this is true, F equals ma, yes, it's true, good enough, but Einstein comes along and says, actually, there's more to it than that.
Right.
And that becomes the new paradigm.
Right. Yeah, so the question is, what do you mean by this is true? And it's approximately true. Well, what in the world does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So he makes the case here that mathematics is something that you do only with your mind, and yet it tells us something, to a certain extent, true about the world outside of our mind, right? So the issue then is mathematics then can't remain in our mind if it's going to be used in science, right? It must answer to the world, right? It must describe and predict behavior that we can observe if it's going to do what we want it to do in the scientific process, right? And so that's the basic issue with regard to the experimental method. So notice, mathematics then must ultimately earn its keep, he tells us, by matching observation. He says Hume was aware of this, and though the mathematics was a substantive part of the new philosophy, it was only through its connection with the sensible world that Newton revealed its true power. So it had to be connected with the sensible world, otherwise it wouldn't help us at all, right?
Yeah. We see 4 apples, and so we believe that there are 4 objects that we term apples in front of us. So.
Right. If we take one away, we believe that there are only 3, so therefore the math tells us that 4 take away 1 is 3, right? And so he says that, but what Newton has done so far only for the inanimate world, that is for the physical world, Hume wanted to extend this particular method beyond natural science to what he called moral philosophy, right? And so for Hume, knowledge of the world must be grounded in experience. Science had turned him into an empiricist, and of course, he wasn't the last convert. Rosenberg calls empiricism the official epistemology of science. Epistemology here is the study of the nature of knowledge.
Yeah, how we know things.
And so empiricism, our sense experience, is how we come to know things. It is the epistemology of science. All right, so with that as a background, Rosenberg has given us, now he's going to question 3 pillars. The 3 main pillars that we use to come up with this. So he's going to question our sense experience, right, as a good skeptic should do, right?
Should we trust our senses? Should we look down the train tracks, they come to a point, should we trust that they do come to a point?
Yeah.
Or should we walk down and see if they ever come to a point?
Secondly, he's going to question the notion of induction, which is a logical notion that we'll get to in just a second. And then finally, he's going to question reasoning.
All reason.
Yeah, all of reasoning, right? As a good skeptic. Because again, in this chapter, he's trying to tell us, what does a good skeptic look like? Well, a skeptic has a thorough and consistent skepticism, right? This is the general skepticism that he's been talking about, that he introduced to us at the beginning. All right, so the first one is skepticism about sense impressions or sense perception, right? Our senses. And so he says, suppose you're hiking through a mountain near your house, enjoying the way the green conifers stand out against the gray sky, the craggy cliffs. In the distance, you see a strangely twisted tamarack tree about 10 feet away. In actuality, he says, you're really seeing only an image, he tells us, right, of that tree. An image that is behind your eyes and behind your skin. The tree itself clearly isn't in our head, right? There's no little tamarack tree in our head, right?
Although the light theoretically bounces off the tree, hits our eye, and actually gets reflected. So what our brain perceives is an upside down image that it turns right side up.
Right, but it's not the tree; it's just an image.
Right, yeah,
and it's on its head is what you're saying.
Yeah,
what you just described.
What we're seeing on TV isn't actually the people; it's photons hitting the screen. Those are the old tube ones,
Right,
but
right.
it's diodes lighting up in certain intensities that create a pattern.
Yeah.
You're not actually seeing people on the screen.
Yeah, amazing,
Yeah.
right? But it sure, but we think that's what
It does
is, right?
look pretty good.
So he says, of course, it seems for all the world that we're seeing the tree, or with your TV analogy, right, the people. But that's only because our optical faculties, including the mind and its construction of the image, are remarkably advanced, right? So here's his first issue. The most we can say about the tree idea, he tells us, is that it is merely a representation of the tree. So this is, he calls this representationalism. Sometimes in philosophy it's called representational realism, right? We only see a representation. The idea in your head stands for or represents the tree, but it's not the tree. There isn't a little tree in the back of our head. So that's the first thing he wants us to know. Secondly, he wants us to know that there's something further he says we believe about the tree idea, namely that it resembles the tree in important respects. It looks like, in quotes he puts, the tree. But then he says, why should we think that? Why should we think, right, that it looks like what we think the tree is, right?
Well, and we see that, especially Hollywood has forever changed the way that we look at things, because when you see representation of a camera, a shot that a camera is taking in, you don't see depth. And so people can do tricks with a camera by putting people in the foreground, making them seem bigger, and people in the background to make them seem smaller. So then you have the giant towering over the little person, and all you've done is just move a distance.
Yeah.
So your sense perception says, oh, that's a little person and that's a giant. But that's not at all what it's representing. It's there are theoretically two people of the same size that are just standing different distances from the camera. Right.
So the question is, our sense perceptions can fool us, they can trick us, or we don't even know whether they're fooling us or tricking us, right?
Yeah.
He says,
we should be skeptical of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point he's getting at, right? We could be having a vivid dream. We could be and here's a philosophical, illustration that's, that's used ad nauseum, a brain in a vat.
Yeah.
Right?
Or as how most people kind of think of it, you're stuck in the matrix, in the pods, as the battery generating power.
All right, so that's all our representations could be. How do we trust them? How do we know? How do we determine the accuracy of them? Right? How do we know it's true what we're looking at? And that's the skepticism that he wants us to be aware of with regard to our sense perception. Right? Now he tries to he gives us a couple of objections to this point that we can't trust. We need to be skeptical about our sense perception. The first objection is that first one down there. He says that you might object, he says, that you're pretty certain your ideas resemble the world out there because your senses have so far kept you alive. Look, Patrick, your senses have kept you alive so clearly,
It tells you not to run into the tree because it's there. It's going to hurt if you do.
Exactly.
So you should trust for all the other times that you didn't run into the tree. Now's the time not to run into
the tree. Right, but notice, if you run into the tree and it hurts you, that is just a sense perception, right? The physical presence of the tree is a sense perception, right? And so here's the question. He says, unfortunately, this objection won't work. The only way you know that you've done all these things is through the very senses you're trying to vouch for. You're arguing for the credibility of your senses while using their own credentials.
Right. So this is a circular argument. So you're trying to say, look, here's my senses. It's making me sense things like running into the tree. Yeah. Therefore, we should trust our senses.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So how do I trust? Why do I trust my senses? Well, because my senses tell me I should trust my senses.
Right.
Yeah, that's like saying, how do I know that Kalamazoo is in Michigan? Well, because Kalamazoo is in Michigan.
Right.
Right. Circular.
Right. And so if we were to have a bad argument on our perspective, why do we believe God exists? Well, because God says He exists.
Right.
Okay. If the other side can use that same argument and get the same result and say that's good enough, then me saying that God exists because he says he exists
should be good enough.
Should be good enough.
Now, what you said is slightly different, because this empiricism argument says the reason why I know my sense experience, or I trust them, is because of my sense experience, is a direct circular argument. What you said is that I believe that God exists because God says or tells me he exists, is not as vicious as a circular argument as what he's pointing out here.
So
right?
God exists because God exists.
Now that would be would be it.
Because
I believe
clearly
God exists.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Again, though, the same issues really kind of is what he's getting at here, right? All right. Well, he says, suppose, however, that you're undaunted. Look, you reply. Perhaps I can't know for certain that I'm not a brain in the vat. He calls it a BIV. Right?
Brain in vat, yes.
Yeah. But what's more likely? There it is, right? What's more likely, that I'm a brain in a vat or that I'm really in front of a tree? Unfortunately, he says, this doesn't work either, right? He says, after all, you judge which scenario is more likely, the brain in the vat as opposed to the real tree, based on the other things you know. And for all you know, you're a brain in the vat. And so how do you know those other things aren't just part of the brain in a vat experience?
Right. So we have people who, we would say because of a mix-up in brain chemistry or something along those lines, claim to be Napoleon or Jesus or anything else. And so why do we say that they're insane or crazy for believing those things, or wrong for believing those things? Is it possible to have that same type of reality? Why is our side, the supposed sane side, saying that's incorrect?
Yeah.
If we're brain in vats, right?
Now remember, he's getting at physical reality, right?
Then we should also say that that's entirely possible for them to be reincarnated Napoleon or multiple Napoleons that are coming about.
That's right. Because so clearly he says, of course, right? You'd be insane. That's the point you're making, right? To believe you're a brain in a vat. But that is much different from arguing that you aren't, right? In other words, arguing is giving a good reason, and the only good reason we have is based, at least from this perspective, on our sense perceptions, which is a circular reasoning. We're using our sense perceptions to justify our sense perceptions. And he's saying that doesn't work, right?
Right.
So whatever he says, the point is that Hume helps us to see that we have no good reason for believing that our ideas resemble the world outside our minds. Wow. Right? Now that is skepticism. That's consistent skepticism. There's not a good reason to believe that our ideas resemble the world. This is a microphone, or at least that's what, my perception of it is. Could be a picture of a microphone, could be a hologram of a microphone.
Well, and we saw that Hawking's claimed to believe this. We see that Elon Musk at least thinks that it's more likely. We see Neil deGrasse Tyson claiming that it's more likely that we're just in a simulation, so we're not really experiencing reality. Although he's, all these people are scientists who are, doing things that, if you're just a brain in a vat, in the Matrix, why do science? Why figure things out? Those things aren't actually real that you're figuring out. You're just figuring out how the code of the Matrix works.
Yeah. So skepticism with regard to physical reality, or what we would call sense perception. Our senses can be questioned, right? We may be a brain in a vat. We may be in a vivid dream. How do we know? That's a pretty sticky wicket to get around, right? And
you can't then go rely on your senses, because that's the thing that you're trying to use or to prove.
So it's not a good argument,
right? You're not good. You're not justified in using it.
Good, yeah. And so he says, to echo Quine, which is another 20th century philosopher, the Humean, David Hume, right? The Humean condition is the human condition, right? So there we are. We're in this condition, right? All right, the next one he wants us to look at is skepticism about induction.
Right.
Right. So this one is about what?
So he says, in addition to direct experiences, we must often reason from that experience. We frequently use our brains to reason from old beliefs about the world to new beliefs about the world. This reasoning process can take many forms, but in general, it's called inference. So you're walking along, you come to the edge of a cliff, and you kick a rock down, and you see the rock falls. Well, if you take another step, you should induce that you will likely fall as well.
Right.
But why should we believe that?
That's the issue.
We saw the rock fall, but we didn't see us fall.
Right.
So we should just wildy coyote. As long as we don't look down, we can keep going. Don't look down, you're good.
Right.
Yeah.
In other words, we've never actually seen ourselves fall, or we never actually seen that we will fall. Mm-hmm. If we're just basing it on our sense experience, which is what the skeptic wants us to do, then we haven't seen the future yet, and so how do we know what the future will be like?
So again, it's what our experience, what our senses are telling us, not what the scientific process of going, well, I think this will happen. Well, then you have to test it out. And your senses. But
wait a minute, it happened in the past. That's true, right? But that doesn't mean anything with regard to what things change.
Right. Or what we're predicting as patterns end up changing. So, when you have Kepler and them witnessing the bodies in the sky, and they go along, and then they turn around back on themselves, our model is telling us something different. Yeah. So just because it was going in the westward way, all of a sudden it's doubling back on itself, which we weren't expecting. Yeah. So why should we trust induction when things like that could occur?
Right. So the idea of induction is it's happened before in the past, therefore probably it'll happen again in the same way in the future. And he's questioning, is that a good way to reason?
Right, and so if we live in a universe where we believe that evolution occurs, we should assume that things are changing all the time. So our brain chemistry, our makeup, we should imagine that we're evolving into something more suited for our environment. The universe could be, having a bigger hiccup in the heat death, and so the speed of light could dramatically shift in speed, and things could change because of that. We could go from living today to not living tomorrow. The sun could all of a sudden, use up all its energy or explode. There's nothing really there to give you the confidence to say what happened yesterday should be happening today.
Right. I call it. It can be called the turkey problem. Right. The farmer went out, bought to the market. Bought a brand new newborn baby turkey, took him to to his farm, put him in the turkey, coop, pen, whatever. Put turkey's head, right? And the first day he fed the turkey, right? He went into the shed, got the feed, came out and fed the turkey. He did that the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the 50th day, the 100th day. Went into the shed, got the feed, come out and gave it to the turkey, right? So the turkey, is getting bigger and bigger. The 200th day, the 300th day, went into the shed, got the feed, gave it to the turkey. The 350th day, went into the shed, got the feed, and gave it to the turkey, right? The 360th day, the 361st, 2nd, 3rd. On the 365th day, he went into the shed and came out with an axe. Because it was Thanksgiving.
Well, of course. Yes.
And so we will be turkeys if we absolutely hold that nothing ever changes, right? That's the turkey problem.
Yeah.
And that's the problem of induction. Now, he doesn't spend a whole lot of time with this because this is a pretty common problem, and most philosophers, anyway, are aware of this particular problem, right?
But we do see scientists have this belief in uniformitarianism. What happened yesterday informs what happens today.
They almost are forced to do that in order to do science, and yet the issue he's making is we need to be skeptical about that.
Right.
Because there's not a good reason to believe that the future will be like the past. Right? All right, and then finally what he does here is give us skepticism about reasoning.
Oh, man. This one's the hard one, right? Because to kind of start out, you're always reasoning.
Yeah. In fact, what he says is, now in all this arguing for skepticism, Hume is using his reason right? And so it had better not be inductive reason or he's in trouble, right? But there are other kinds of reasoning that he suggests here that we need to be aware of. Three of them that he mentions. Unfortunately, says with respect to any kind of reasoning at all, inductive, deductive, adductive, things again look pretty dismal, just like they did for our sense experience and just like they did for induction, right? So inductive, deductive, and abductive. He says when it comes to our inferences, there's always, says Hume, the possibility that we've made a mistake. So that's Hume's criticism of reasoning, right? Now, he doesn't like that. He doesn't think it works, right? Hume says that some measure of doubt to our conclusions, no matter what they are, even if the doubt is minimal, and therefore we should be skeptical about them. Again, Stokes doesn't think he's not entirely satisfied with that, but he does think that the point should be made. What's the point? He says there's a much more troubling problem with reason. Even if we ignore the calculus, these doubts that we have, we still never have a non-circular argument for reason's reliability. Why? Well, to offer any argument for reason,
you use it.
You're using reason, right? All right, and to use it, we must first trust it, right? And so I believe so, he says, that I may understand. So again, we have this circular problem. In order to justify reason, we have to reason to justify reason. But the thing that we're trying to justify is the thing that we're using that's a circular argument. The problem with circular arguments is not that they're bad. It's just that they don't tell us anything. They're empty. It's like I said before. How do I know that Kalamazoo is a city in Michigan? Well, I know that because Kalamazoo is a city in Michigan. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. That's not a good reason. If I was skeptical about it, that wouldn't, sway me with regard to an argument, right? And so when we use reason to justify reason, we're reasoning in a circle.
Right. We're using the thing that we're trying to prove. Yeah. And unfortunately,
it's
I think
begging the question.
Right. We kind of have to step outside of the universe in order to get there.
We have to have some external person to tell us that this is the way things have to be. Otherwise, we're kind of stuck in a circle.
So maybe kind of a supreme being that may have made this too.
Yeah, same way with our sense experience, right? How do we trust him? We can't if all we're using is our sense. It's as if we need someone outside of the sense experience to say, yes, your sense experience is authentic and it is trustworthy. Right? That kind of thing.
And can be checked, or when you use reason, there's an understanding that you can know the universe. The fact that we believe that we can know things about the universe or predict things kind of puts an assumption within the universe itself that this blob of matter and energy has no ability, that we can know things. Why is that even the case? Why can't it be tomorrow all of a sudden the universe clicks off in the opposite way, and all of a sudden you can see in the dark and not see in the light? And
there's no good reason other than, well, it hasn't happened like that in the past, right, to tell us that, right? Yeah. So what he ends this chapter on what he calls the importance of safety inspections, right? According to the standard intellectual rules of engagement, if we have to take reason at its word, that is, we have to take reason at its word because that's all we have, and so we have to take it not based on a good argument, he's suggesting, but we have to take it by, you ready? Faith.
As a good skeptic, I would not like that.
Yeah, right. He says, this is one of the most important ideas in all philosophy, and it's crucial for understanding the inner workings of debate. By definition, we have disagreements because we believe different things, but no two of us have entirely different beliefs. We share a host of them, and the game rules depend on such beliefs. There will be times, however, when we disagree on the rules themselves, and that's what makes a world of difference, he tells us, right? So Hume was right. There are no non-circular arguments for the reliability of our senses. There are no non-circular arguments for the reliability of our reason. In fact, he includes memory or any other of our cognitive tools. And so he tells us that in the course of this book, we'll see other implications of Hume's safety inspections for science and morality especially, right? And he says, but in this chapter and next, he's focusing on our cognitive, that is, our mental facilities, right? All right, so that is chapter 1. He wants us to be good skeptics. And as good skeptics, we need to question the reliability of our sense perception, the reliability of induction, that the future will be like the past, and indeed the notion that we don't have a good reason for reason, right?
So
a non-circular reason to trust.
We've taken all our tools away.
Yeah, wow.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah, right. And we will go from here next time when we look at chapter 2, right? He's going to look at our cognitive abilities. This chapter is called The Believing Primate, and he's going to consider, do we have a good reason to trust any of our cognitive abilities?
We're just monkeys who believe in things.
Yeah.
That's what we'll be back next week. So join us then for Mitch Stokes' How to Be an Atheist. Why many skeptics aren't skeptical enough, including with their senses.
Thank you.